Hello there, you Awakening Wonders. Thanks for joining me today for Stay Free with Russell Brand. Wherever you're watching us, click the link in the description and get over and join us on Rumble. We're talking to Andrew Bridgen, who's got some pretty extraordinary insights into British politics and British media. He was a member of Parliament for a long time who began with pretty, I would say, modest, yet somewhat ambitious notions to run the small constituency, that means his congressional area, in accordance with his principles. During the COVID period, he spoke out against vaccines and was abruptly and I would say succinctly cut right out of the political game. He's got extraordinary insights into the British establishment, including, it appears to me, information about a former British Prime Minister and paedophilia that's pretty bone-bending and I would say is a further piece of evidence that British institutions, as well as American political institutions, appear to have been corrupted in a manner that we all understand as being within the rubric and remit of the Epstein files. Compromised political leaders are much, much easier to control and manage, particularly if you have a centralised media that are only willing to report on subjects that are beneficial to them and are compliant when it comes to the destruction of dissident voices. This conversation with Andrew Bridgen is exciting, it's at points alarming, and I hope you'll stay with us for all of it. Andrew Bridgen, thank you for joining me on Stay Free with Russell Brand. Oh, I see. Are you upset?
No. We've got to talk about important things, so it was worth waiting.
Do you want to talk about? Sorry, I was late, Andrew. Do you want to talk? So you want to talk about important things?
Trump's statement's important.
Go on.
Well, he's moved his political position in a relatively few weeks from the grandfather of warp speed and the vaccines saved millions of lives to his Truth Social statement demanding that Pfizer and Moderna produce the evidence to the public that the vaccines were safe and effective and have saved millions of lives, which they can't do. And then yesterday's statement attacking the number of vaccines that babies are given and raising concerns about autism
and Tylenol and pregnancy. So you think that sort of, in a sense, Trump, who obviously campaigned and was elected as a maverick, has gone, would you say then that it's important and it's significant and it's positive because it's a further exposure of things that many people have suspected since the beginning of the pandemic period, that those medications were not as safe as was claimed?
Absolutely, but also, President Trump's privy to the evidence that Robert Kennedy Jr. and his team have got.
So you think it's evidence-based? That's what's encouraging for you?
He knows what's coming, and he's basically said that Robert Kennedy Jr. and his team are going to give all the details in the next few weeks. That fits in with the timescale I've been told, that the first thing he's going to do is expose the link between vaccines and autism, and that's bad enough. And then a few weeks after that, we're going to have the very bad news about the COVID jabs.
So in a sense, it's going to be a massive repositioning when it comes to the relationship between certainly the American government and Big Pharma, and likely, I suppose you're assuming, between the British government and Big Pharma. But what's going to be challenging is that the British government haven't realigned their position with the electorate and the media. So I suppose what they're going to have to do is somehow, undermine this messaging, or just to continue to demonise Trump? Or what do you think? How do you think this is going to impact the UK, Andrew, given that that's still your constituency, if not officially anymore, since you've no longer a member of Parliament?
Well, I was hoping that the tsunami of truth and justice would sweep across from the Atlantic and sweep away those who've been deceiving us for so long over here and our self-serving politicians. But what's clear from the media over here today is that they're just going to ridicule, cherry pick bits of Trump's statement and RFK's statement that they don't agree with. And they're going to stick with the narrative because, quite honestly, the whole political class in the UK and Europe and the Anglosphere and the mainstream media, this is an existential threat to their future, and they just can't stand it.
Yes, it is an existential threat, and as you've indicated already in this response, is a kind of trans-partisan issue. So, and also, are you surprised how quickly, in general, people seem to have turned away from what was exposed during the COVID period? People don't seem enraged, engorged, outraged and ready to take to the streets on the subject of COVID and how the pandemic was handled. But I do get the sense, even with something like the sort of Unite the Kingdom Patriot March, which obviously we all know focused on the issue of migration, I sense that some of the distrust around government and the media is informed by how both of those institutions behaved during the pandemic period. So even if people are able to be distracted when it comes to these significant revelations that you've just described in Trump's announcement and the further revelations likely to come, it's possible that the unrest across Europe, in France, in the Netherlands, which is coming from all sorts of quarters, France anti-austerity protests, Netherlands anti-migration protests, and in the UK, I suppose, anti-migration protests, whatever people are claiming is the locus and focus of their displeasure and angst, there is a broad and I would say trans-partisan displeasure with our systems of government, Andrew. Now, what fascinates me about you is you've been at the heart of these systems for a while, and I note that you were well ahead of it when it came to, and a lot of our US audience and community won't be aware of this, but the British Post Office scandal, where essentially a computer glitch meant that a lot of people were falsely accused of, and I think in some cases convicted of, fraud and robbery and cybercrime, when in fact some faulty software was always at the heart of it, and the government kind of covered it up, and until a TV show was made about it, no one cared. And I believe that you were one of the first people that were active in bringing the complaints and laments of those people to the forefront. So when you were talking about COVID, I paid attention because I felt like you're a person that gets on board early when there's injustice, even though you were when you were in government, you were a Conservative MP, denied the whip and kicked out of Parliament, our Congress, because of your stance primarily on COVID. That's right, isn't it? Isn't it, Andrew? Is that a fair characterisation of the Post Office stuff and the way you came to not be in the Conservative Party anymore?
Absolutely. And I was everything that was in the Mr. Bates and the Post Office programme, I'd actually said in the Chamber of the House of Commons. It's recorded in Hansard 10 years earlier. And shockingly, Russell, the lobby in Parliament are supposedly the highest quality journalists we have for all outlets. I'd been to all those people in 2013, 2014 and said, I've got all the evidence, the sub-postmasters are all innocent. Biggest miscarriage of justice in UK history. 1,000 people at least convicted who were convicted on dodgy computer evidence. If you run this story and use this evidence, you'll get an award as a journalist for this. And not one of them could cover it. And it was exactly the same in 2022, 2023 and 2024 with the vaccine harms and excess deaths. Same journalists, same attitude. Couldn't cover it.
Well, do you think that as the evidence becomes unavoidable and unignorable, they will report on it? Or, Andrew, do you think, as I do, that we can no longer rely on these instruments of the state? And by the state, I mean the relationships between government and the global corporate systems that seem to me to have more authority and power than the apparently temporary political parties that are elected, that we have to bypass them, both when it comes to the conveyance of information and when it comes to the creation of new systems of government. I suppose it's a pretty big question, but based on what you learned during that scandal, and based on what you've experienced, subsequently with COVID, both while a member of Parliament and since being booted out of the Conservative Party for expressing your opinions about government corruption and deception during the pandemic era, how disillusioned and disenchanted with both British media, and I suppose by definition global media these days, and British Parliament, but also globalist political systems by definition these days. What can you tell us about the level of corruption and hypocrisy that we don't know because we've not been where you've been on the inside of these systems?
Well, talking about the mainstream media, it's not only you and I who think we can't rely on them for the truth. It's increasing proportion of the general public. That's why there's a market for people producing programs, independent media like yourself and many, many others. And it's only going to grow. And I think the more that the mainstream media audience collapses because people realize they're not speaking the truth. And one of the biggest powers that the mainstream media or any media has is the ability to decide what is and isn't the news. And I was shocked. Russell. You remember the first cabinet meeting of the Trump administration when Robert Kennedy Jr. stood up and said, "I want to make a statement, Mr. President, that the department I am now in charge of, Health and Human Services, has been the biggest conduit of child trafficking into the United States, and I've stopped it." And nobody reported on that in any UK media. It was never reported at all.
Why?
I mean, well, you'll have to ask yourself. The reason is because it's happening in this country as well, and they can't talk about it.
Do you think that, gosh, this isn't the direction I imagined our conversation going in, because of course we've got to talk about important, corroboratable concepts and policies like the government's plan to introduce for the first time digital ID, a policy that Tony Blair, among others, have been keen to implement for a long time. But seeing how the idea of child trafficking's come up, and seeing how this idea of sexual blackmail seems to be pretty significant, and seeing how Mandelson couldn't become the ambassador to the United States because of his potential involvement and at least connection to Jeffrey Epstein, which is obviously by its nature an international story. What are you saying about child trafficking, the British media and the British government? Are you saying that there's some specific reason why they can't report on and address stories connected to child trafficking?
Yes, I made a mini documentary with Urban Scoop, that's Tommy Robinson's production team, while he was otherwise engaged at His Majesty's pleasure, and that was documenting evidence with names of a child trafficking operation from Ukraine to the UK. I'd offered that to the government. It had gone to Gloucestershire Police, who've got, believe it or not, I've got a specialist child trafficking unit. It had gone to MI5, it had gone to the National Crime Agency. No one wanted to look at it, and the government wouldn't look at it either. And when anything that nobody wants to talk about or won't even look at, that's a red flag for me.
Whether it's a sort of somewhat parochial or at least nationally confined story like the post office scandal, which we've touched on, an international global incident, issue, scandal like the pandemic, or the more esoteric but equally peculiarly omnipresent stories such as child trafficking, potential paedophilia, paedophile grooming gangs, and an inability and unwillingness to investigate rape gangs, sometimes on grounds of ethnicity, as with the Pakistan rape gangs in the UK, or what we appear to be sort of circling and approaching now, the idea that people in power in Britain have been sexually corrupted for a long, long while. And in my country, the language would be around like Jimmy Savile and his close ties to people in power, including the royal family, who posthumously was revealed, even though it was bloody obvious to anyone, to be a dreadful paedophile and necrophiliac, and sort of sometimes crimes even beyond imagination. But in life, he was decorated. That seems to be an important distinction. People that are close to the establishment appear to be protected and celebrated. Anyone that speaks out against the establishment are subject to a complex and brutal arsenal of weapons to discredit and destroy them. It's happened to you. Certainly, I feel that many of the things that happened to me in the UK have unusual connections to aspects of power that I'm really looking forward to investigate going forward. And I wonder, how far can you go, given that you were right when you said about the post office staff, that there was government corruption and a cover-up, when you said about the pandemic and the relationship with Moderna and Pfizer, with I don't know, Rishi Sunak, for example, an early investor in Moderna through his hedge fund. Are you suggesting then that within current British parliamentary circles, or at least within the aspects of institutional power around it, there's a sort of a paedophilia problem?
There's certainly a problem that people can't speak truth unto power. They cannot speak. In the chamber of the House of Commons, we're always supposed to speak without fear or favour. I was offered a bribe in January 2022 to shut up of anything I wanted in the world. Just tell us what you want. And I said, well, is that the game we're playing? And they said, that's the game we're always playing. And
Anything in the world? Did you not think of a few things like a boat?
I did. I thought about something, and I said, well, if that's the game we're playing, I want the Prime Minister's resignation letter. But they said I couldn't have that. So I said I didn't want anything else then. If that's the game we're playing.
It wasn't a truly open offer, because you can't have the resignation.
We never got down to the details, because it was never something I was going to contemplate. Well, I was speaking out about the vaccines to try and protect the lives of children, and that was never going to be a consideration. But what I will tell you is that there are very famous politicians that I went to in 2022 to ally with me to stop them vaccinating children, who admitted to me they'd had 2 Pfizer shots, gone to the gym, felt ill, gone to hospital, and been told after an ECG they'd had 2 heart attacks, and they still would not speak out. I've got people who came to me in Parliament and said, you're absolutely right about the vaccines. My sister's taken a Moderna shot. She's now paralysed from the neck down. This is another colleague who's an MP. And I said, well, I'm really sorry to hear that, but surely you're going to speak out now, you know for sure. And she said, well, my sister's a nurse and she was coerced into taking it, and now she's paralysed. She's at the mercy of the NHS. And you know what the NHS are like with whistleblowers, Andrew. I'm not going to speak out. And they never, ever did. I had MPs' wives come to me and say, I told him not to take them. Now he's got heart problems. But somehow or other, those representatives were persuaded to keep quiet about something as important as life and death and injury to children and adults. And that's a rotten system.
We can't make this content without the support of our partners. Here's a message from one now. Cryptocurrency is here to stay. We're going to have to educate ourselves, and fast, particularly with this new and extraordinary deal that's going to impact everything and therefore everyone in the cryptocurrency world. I couldn't believe it when I first saw it. Listen to this. Trump Media just inked a massive $6.4 billion deal with Yorkville Acquisition Corp. And Crypto.com, the crypto platform trusted by millions of users worldwide. They have conglomerated in order to scoop up $6.4 billion in CRO, the powerhouse token that fuels fast, low-fee DeFi staking rewards and real-world perks like cashbacks on your spend, to establish America's first CRO, Treasury Trump Media Group CRO strategy. When it's done, this new company will be the biggest publicly traded CRO holder out there. Do you want to get in on the action? Head to Crypto.com today and let's make crypto great again. For more information on the proposed business combination, check out Yorkville Acquisition Corp's public filings. Go to the link in the description and look up Crypto.com to learn more. What interests me is, it's always fascinating to hear details, but, I'm not surprised, because for a long time now, I've assumed this is true.
Before they threw me out of the party, I had one last meeting with the party, a representative, someone who's very famous. And I thought he was a decent guy. And at the end of an hour and a half of listening to my concerns about the vaccines and NG163, the use of midazolam and morphine on the vulnerable elderly in 2020 and since, he turned around to me at the end of an hour and a half and said, Andrew, there is currently no political appetite for your views on the vaccines. There may be in 20 years' time, and you're probably going to be proven right then. But in the meantime, you need to bear in mind you're taking on the most powerful vested interest in the world, with all the personal risk for you which that will entail should you continue. And that's what they did.
It's obviously really brave of you, Andrew, to put yourself in this position. And I wonder if just sort of in the interim, you feel at any point exhausted by it or scared by it, or like you can't make a difference. I mean, in a way, the information's all out there now, even though you're saying that after that Trump statement, more information is going to be forthcoming. In a way, the system seems to be able to withstand these kind of shocks, doesn't it? And
Well,
kind of
it owns
absorb
the
them.
media. It owns the media, and I think it was Malcolm X that gave the great quote, which is the media has most power in the world because they have the power to make the innocent guilty and the guilty innocent, and they do.
So don't you, like, on that basis, what do you think our focus should be on? Like, when it, like, don't you feel, this is what I feel, instead of trying to tell people this is what you should care about, you should care about the fact they lied to you during the pandemic. You should care about that. Even people care or they don't. I think you have to find what motivates them. And in our country at the moment, they care about migration. And even though I personally care more that the issue of migration is plainly being used to divide people.
Absolutely.
If that's what motivates people, then that's what motivates them. And it's always been a sort of a sad fact that people are more mobilized by local, observable, smaller challenges than by the broader problems that likely facilitate and cause those more observable problems. Say in the case of migration, who is facilitating migration that is causing these kind of social problems, and to what end? What is presumably beneficial to the kind of institutions that we're discussing now to have social unrest in the UK and across Europe, really, that's wrought by illegal and unmanaged migration. And like when I was talking to Tommy Robinson on this show, I said, and generally what I say is, if people don't have power, if a group don't have that much power, how can you change the world? By focusing on that group. And you know, migrants, if people don't want migration, I totally get it and feel like in a democracy they should be able to decide for themselves what their position is. But do you think now that people understand that even though the problem of migration may get a lot of heat because it's affecting people in their communities and it's affecting people because, you know, their children are getting sexually molested, and one couldn't be more sympathetic about such a matter, that in order to make the change, it's the systems and institutions that have to be addressed and attacked. I wonder if the issue of big pharma and vaccines is the issue. I'm not sure. Migration seems to get a lot of interest and generate a lot of emotion. Do you think that digital ID and increasing bureaucratic control is going to be something that's going to rouse people's passions? Do you think that's something they care about? Do you think that that's something that the British people, for example, will take a stand against? Because it seems like Keir Starmer is going to try and reintroduce ID cards or sort of, biometric data. Firstly, why is it a problem? And do you think people care about it, Andrew?
Well, they should do. Again, it's another thing that no one ever mentions in Parliament. All the parties are aligned with it, Agenda 2030, and that's why we're getting the uncontrolled migration. And they can only implement all the aspects of Agenda 2030 and its controls if they have digital ID. So if we can stop digital ID, it's very, very difficult to see how we can end up with a dystopian future, which I believe is in line for us.
I thought that Agenda 2030 was a conspiracy theory. Are you saying Agenda 2030 is a real thing?
It's a real thing, and if you look on the government's website, it says we remain aligned to Agenda 2030. But we never debated it in Parliament. No one ever talks about it. It's just there in the background, and all the policies are taking us that way. So if you sign up for digital ID, if you say yes to digital ID, I fear you'll never be able to say no to the government again. And whether people are still, not everyone is hot under the collar about being lied to about the vaccines. Some people say they want to put it in the past, but what it has done, it's taken trust in governments around the world to a record low levels. And I don't see any reason they're coming back. Now, in politics, I think, the true leader says to people, this is my shared vision of our future. Come with me and let's make it a reality. Whereas the false leaders we seem to have at the moment, they will make promises they know they can't keep. People won't follow them. They can't lead people because people won't follow them. So therefore, instead of leading, they have to control. And digital ID will be a massive tool of control. It'll always be sold to you as it's for your own convenience and for your own security. And there's an old saying that if you're ever willing to trade your freedom for security, you'll end up with neither freedom nor security. And the only person it's going to be convenient for will be the government. And we will be like prisoners out on license, where we're tagged, and they'll know exactly where we are and what we're doing all the time. And if we give into this, Russell, future generations, it's not just about us, it's about future generations that will be condemned to that. They will never know the freedoms that they didn't have. And that can't be allowed to happen.
It's already happening in a sense, isn't it? Because we're already sort of voluntarily tagging ourselves into all manner of social media systems. And I saw some government representative, in fact, I think I saw Starmer himself saying last time they tried to implement this, people weren't so familiar with the normalisation of data capture and the kind of biometric control that would be asserted through digital ID, and that people are probably more willing to accept it. But of course, and I know that it's usually crisis that's used to implement these kind of measures. And one of the things I've noticed since 9/11, I suppose, onwards, is successive crises used to implement further controls that are never really retracted. And I checked out the government website at your suggestion there, and yes, you're right, there it is, Agenda 2030, part of UK aid. You'd think that they would have got rid of UK aid after it was exposed that USAID, or USAID as it was also known, was essentially a CIA front and a way of funneling money to causes that were sympathetic to global imperialism, whether in academia across the world or some of the more risible and ridiculous attention-grabbing items like, I don't know, like a $90 million worth of condoms dropped on Palestine. It's kind of a thing that people should be concerned about. Anything that gets dropped on Palestine, people should be concerned about, actually. But in short, it's a very, very interesting, it's interesting to discover that the global goals of Agenda 2030 are here. And in fact, you see Bill Gates and the like often wearing that insignia on a lapel. It's a clear Agenda 2030 talks about global goals. So there it is in black and white. It's a globalist agenda. No poverty, zero hunger, good health, all, the kind of goals actually that any one of us would happily pursue, but perhaps would be unwise to entrust to global imperialists such as temporarily elected officials who, as you say, don't provide a vision. And that's because they're the managerial class. They're not leaders. You can see that and smell it on Keir Starmer. He's a middle management bureaucrat who's operating at the behest of real power. And whether you want to see that real power as just sort of commercial, corporate, bureaucratic power coming from entities that we're all familiar with the names of, WHO, WTO, World Bank, WEF, NATO, UN, EU, all those, or something more nefarious than that. And that's why it's interesting to me that our conversations touched already, Andrew, upon sort of local parochial issues like that post office scandal, global issues like the pandemic, even the potential that there's weird stuff going on around children and sexual abuse, and the fact that they have the total capture of the media, and that digital ID will always be used to exert more control. Because they know that people, generally speaking, want to be free, that it's our nature to want to be free, whenever they try to amplify controls, they have to justify it, usually through fear, sometimes through desire. You can get me voluntarily to stare at that screen like an imbecile, using my lower nature and my fear and stuff. But to get genuine control, they have to operate in a pretty cohesive and dreadful manner. And we really saw that during the pandemic. I really admire your bravery, Andrew, and I just wonder where you stand right now when it comes to ensuring that this kind of momentum that there is emerging in the UK, mainly I would have to say behind Tommy Robinson and a sort of re-emergent nationalism, potentially to a degree around a politician like Nigel Farage, leader of Reform. If Britain's going to have a Trump, it's going to be Farage. You'd have to say that, unless Jeremy Clarkson wants to get his hands dirty. And I wonder what you feel your role is in ensuring, firstly, a degree of information sharing, like an informed public, and the ability even to campaign, communicate about these kind of issues within Parliament. Because it doesn't really seem like there's much traction within the institutions that matter, just even relying on your personal testimony when it comes to COVID and the way that was handled within your party in 2022.
Well, it wasn't just within the Conservative Party; it was across Parliament, wasn't it? There was the Unit Party was fully functioning. I'm not convinced that I've known Nigel Farage for 10 years. I'm not convinced that he's the answer. When I'd exhausted everyone in Parliament to stand with me and expose the truth on the vaccines in early 2023, I went to go and see Nigel. Had an hour and a half with him and Aaron Banks. And at the end, Nigel turned around to me and said that he would not be speaking about the vaccines. And if you know what's good for you, Andrew, you won't either. So he knew, and he wasn't willing to stand up. That is not leadership, Russell. It's another word. I think your viewers know what that word is. Well, I haven't found the party or the vehicle yet that's the answer to the UK's problems. And we're not talking about a bit of reform now. I think having been inside the belly of the beast for over 14 years, there is little of it I keep because it's not serving the people. We should be electing politicians who are servant leaders who are there to serve the people, not their masters. Our MPs even changed their job description after the last election to take away the need to represent the public, their electorate. I mean, if that's not their job, what is their job? And I think what you thought you got.
What you're referring to? What does that mean? What are you referring to? I don't understand.
MP's job description was redefined after the election. I don't know how you do that between contracts. People thought they'd got a member of Parliament to represent them in Westminster, and what you've actually got is the representative of a party to represent that party in your constituency, and that is the antithesis of what we should have. There's so many failings in Parliament. They won't talk about any of the big issues. It is a pantomime, and this left-right thing, that is an illusion of choice. I've come to the conclusion it's an illusion of choice. It isn't about right and left. It's about right and wrong on many of the issues. I spoke to, believe it or not, I'll give you an admission. I have a Labour MP, a serving Labour MP who's a friend of mine on a personal level, not politically. And I spoke to him. He rang me a few weeks ago, and I said, for 14 years, you wanted to get onto the government benches. How's it been the last 12 months? And he said, it's terrible. He's a 5-term MP. And he said, I'm out at the next election, whatever happens, after a year in government. And I said, well, what do you expect? Look at what you've done. You've starved you've frozen the old age pensioners with the heating allowance removal. You're starving the severely disabled as if that's going to make them be able to work if you're severely disabled. And I said, I hope you didn't vote for that appalling decriminalisation of abortion up to birth, which not 2 or 3% of the public would support. It flew through the House of Commons. And he said to me, be honest, Andrew, I don't know. I said, what do you mean you don't know if you voted for it? He said, it's that bad that I don't look at the order paper anymore. I just go and vote when the bell rings, wherever the whips direct me, because if I don't know what we're voting for, I can sleep rather better. That's a 5-term Labour MP.
That's amazing.
That's the state of our democracy.
That's all that we can put on YouTube. Click the link in the description. Join us over on Rumble for the rest of this conversation. Remember, if you don't have Rumble Premium yet, get Rumble Premium now. Even though it's tangential, with your we began that answer by saying they changed the way they describe the role of a member of Parliament, and much of this brilliant book by Gavin de Becker, published by Skyhorse, which is a brilliant publishing company that